Diversity is our topic today. I've put a picture of a mosaic here because when I think of diversity, I think of the concept of a mosaic. We live in a very diverse nation. It's made up of lots of little individuals who together make this amazing picture of diversity. I think it's great if we can actually think of our classroom this way, that together all the people, all the students in our classroom make a wonderful picture. But if we look at them individually, they are each little tiny parts of that great picture. Some of them will have sharp edges, some will have round edges, some will have pointy edges, some will be one colour, some will be another colour. They'll all be different. But together they make up our class. And we as teachers, of course, want to work to have the best class and create the best learning environment for our students. In order to do that, we have to be very conscious of that issue of diversity. Now this is a definition of diversity. In some schools, there may be students from 50 or more language or cultural groups. You may end up in one of these schools. And sometimes our students are treated differently because of the way their differences are perceived, rather than because of these differences per se. For example, as teachers, we may have preconceptions about how a child from a particular ethnic group might behave, or expectations that a child with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, will have learning problems. We have these preconceptions, and we need to work at changing them, or being very aware of them and not letting them rule our behaviour. Social status and educational background can result in some differences being regarded as strengths and others as deficits. A child from an advantaged background who is frequently absent from school because she travels overseas with her parents may be thought of differently to a child who is away to grieve for this length of time. So we are thinking today about all of those preconceptions that we have and how they might affect the way we work within our classroom. It is most important that we can recognise the differences in our students, and at all levels of schooling and at all levels of curriculum, state, national and local, we are asked in particular to consider the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. Despite many obvious tangible differences between Indigenous children raised in traditional settings and those living in urban settings, there are a number of important common socialisation practices that contrast with those typically valued by mainstream Anglo-Australian cultural groups. It's important that we have some understanding of these. They may include self-regulation, self-reliance, and in some situations a measure of equality with their parents. Indigenous children are expected to be independent and take responsibility for their younger siblings from an earlier age. Quite different from the Anglo-Australian family group that you may be more familiar with. There is typically a much greater value placed on close relationships with family and friends and less importance placed on individual achievement. We need to be aware of this. Some Indigenous students therefore find schooling alienating, especially if the teacher emphasises individual competition and the classroom is largely teacher directed. There are many problems facing Indigenous students, and many of these problems are problems that we are not able to solve and are at the forefront of political decisions, and hopefully that will lead to great improvements in the education of our Indigenous people. But from our point of view as teachers, we need to be aware of these differences that exist. Another form of diversity is that of ethnicity. We know that ethnicity refers to the geographical location of our ancestors' birthplace. We have a huge number of students whose backgrounds come from a range of different geographical continents. And in this multicultural society that we are going to work in, the schools are the places where explicit positive messages can and should be relayed about the great benefits of an ethnically diverse society. Sometimes those who are unused to ethnic differences can be quite intolerant. Those who have come from the same ethnic communities often choose, understandably, to live together in the same suburb or locality. It's vital that our schools play a role in bringing people together and giving them a sense of respect and purpose. So we can make a difference to this in our schools. Children who are newly arrived in Australia, especially those from small ethnic minority groups who don't speak English, often experience adjustment difficulties. This is particularly true for those who are refugees. And we are more and more likely to have refugees in our classroom. Australian-born children of migrant parents are also likely to have been raised in a culturally different environment, and this might affect their ability to learn at school. Children may arrive at school with different ways of thinking and learning from those valued by the teacher. They may not understand some concepts or have the knowledge that the teacher expects them to have. They may not know the same traditional tales, games, rhymes, language. While it's important not to generalise, we need to be aware that, for example, there may be less understanding of questioning and critical thinking activities, an expectation that learning will be largely teacher-centred, conflicts between role expectations for males and females, or a pressure from home to succeed regardless of the child's ability. So this adds to the complexity of the students in our class. If we've got that students with different ethnic diversities, we have that complex situation that we need to be aware of. Poverty. Certainly very, very important. It may be something that you've not really thought about. Most of us are fortunate enough not to have grown up in poverty. But we have to remember that when we get out into the schools, we may have a class or students, individual students, that are living in poverty. There are many, many families in Australia that are living below the poverty line. Not always the Indigenous or the newly arrived refugees, sometimes single parent families, or what we would consider the average family that has come on hard times. Children of poor or education or economically disadvantaged families are perhaps the most vulnerable in terms of educational attainment. Poverty can impact even more significantly on those who are refugees. or those who live in remote areas, those who are challenged physically or mentally, or those who are part of transient families. Students whose families are poor may not have the resources to attend school excursions or buy school uniforms. They may be undernourished or ill-housed. This can often be distressing for the new teacher. Poverty is often associated with ill health and vulnerability in terms of support networks in times of crisis. And the school community often plays a role, an advocacy role, in working closely with communities to build those families' capacity to cope. Gender is something that has been spoken about for many, many years. It's sometimes difficult to understand the complex relationships of sex, gender and schooling, since much of the debate has been highly politicised. Gender is socially and culturally constructed phenomenon, and there's been much debate in Australia that curriculum and assessment policies and practices have either advantaged boys or girls. And this has changed from year to year. There'd be a focus on developing educational opportunities for girls, and then a focus on developing educational opportunity for boys. It can be argued that it is current stereotyping of feminine and masculine behaviour that contributes much to the shaping of educational outcomes for boys and girls. We need to be careful that we don't stereotype. Just the same, there is evidence that schools are failing some boys, especially in the area of literacy. There's certainly an overrepresentation of male students in intensive reading classes and behaviour management units. However, it's interesting to note that males continue to be more successful after school in terms of career success than many of their female counterparts. So my advice is that you don't make generalisations about which gender learns better. We must be sensitive to the individual needs, the experiences and differences of each girl and each boy in your class. Hopefully we will have lots of gifted and talented students in our class. They are very exciting to work with. It's also a concept that's highly problematic. Many would argue that every child is talented in some way and it's just a matter of tapping into that particular ability. Others would regard these students as constituting a small group at the upper end of the ability continuum, defining gifted children as having high inherited potential, while those who are talented as displaying advanced skills in a specific area when compared to the same age peers. Some children displaying such abilities may need special social and emotional support. As a teacher, you will develop your own definition of these concepts. Perhaps the more crucial issue is how to use your own definition to identify gifted and talented children in the classroom, as your aim is to cater for their individual needs. When making an assessment for giftedness, it's important to use a range of strategies, including interviews with the child or his or her parents, informal and formal observation of a range of tasks, and the teacher's professional judgment. Fortunately, we've moved on from using the simple IQ test to make these determinations. I think it's critical that we implement learning strategies designed to challenge all children. And I think that that would be our aim within our classroom, and to recognise gifts and talents, and to understand each of our students and provide the best learning environment for each one of our students. Traditionally, special programs have also been developed for children who are physically or mentally challenged. This is often determined to be a problem, a word I don't like, but we'll use it at the moment. So once the problem has been diagnosed, a specific remedy is prescribed with a focus on improving the deficits that have been identified. This approach has been termed the medical model. This too can be isolating for students. Where remediation of students' so-called weaknesses are solely focused upon, there can be loss of self-esteem and, as a consequence, motivation. Such a model also makes it difficult to recognise that a mentally challenged learner can be talented in a particular learning area. It's very difficult for us as teachers. We don't have the medical background to understand all of these disabilities. My advice to you is when you have a disabled child in your class that you do as much as you can to find out and gather as much information about that particular disability so you can hopefully have some understanding. Inclusive schooling has been recently the preferred approach to disability. It's a term that's based on the belief that all children can learn and wherever possible should be part of a regular classroom. It also focuses on the student's strengths rather than shortcomings and celebrates that diversity. This doesn't mean that all children have to do the same thing. Providing equal opportunities for all children will not result in equal outcomes. To ensure equality of opportunity and outcome, different provision is required for individuals and groups in any class, regardless of whether they are of one age level or multi-age. Learning tasks that cater for a variety of learning styles and interests or individuals or groups need to be set. Collaborative activities, peer and cross-age tutoring and flexibility and pacing lessons are all possible strategies that can be considered. There is certainly these days an increased awareness of and an understanding about children who manifest unusual behaviour patterns. I'm referring here to the students that suffer from attention deficit order, making it difficult for them to concentrate in the classroom. And then we have the child with Asperger's syndrome, one of the disorders on the autism spectrum. We as the teachers need to develop individual programs to help these students learn. Hopefully you will have, if you have these students, you will have much support in your classroom to help you to not only diagnose but to provide the learning environment needed. In our particular subject area, it's often very difficult because we have problems having an ADHD student in a workshop where a dangerous situation can arise. So you need to carefully analyse the student's disability and seek help where it's needed. Don't just think that you alone should be able to cope with this. Our classrooms are often different to the other classrooms that this student is in. We also need to be aware that there is some argument that children are often wrongly diagnosed or labelled too quickly as having a particular disorder or syndrome. We should always seek assistance from counsellors and other professionals wherever we can to help us to come to an understanding of students' needs. Kids at risk. This is a very sad part of our job, but you will, during your time as a teacher, come across some students who are at risk. They also have special needs within our classroom. They may be finding that learning is problematic for them, regardless of class, gender, race or ethnicity. These students may be experiencing short or long-term problems at home. It could be a serious illness or a death of a parent, a sibling or a caregiver. Some children may be the victims of emotional, physical or sexual abuse. Their learning may be hampered by confusion, guilt or bewilderment. Some students may be experiencing bullying and not want to be there in that classroom. This is also hampering their ability to learn. Other students may have parents who have alcohol or drug problems or have broken the law. These kids also need our special attention in providing a situation that will make them feel comfortable in the classroom and hopefully welcoming them and making them feel safe and secure within our classroom. They need the opportunity to continue to learn in a stimulating environment despite their particular medical condition or the experiences that they are having. So it comes down to knowing your students, knowing what's happening in their lives and being able to make judgments about what their needs are. Now, different learning styles is something that's very important and it's very current at the moment. This list, of course, is the list from Gardner's Intelligences. So I encourage you to think about what sort of learner you are, how you learn best, how you manage to remember what you've learned, how you organise your learning so that you can use it effectively. What do you think about what you have learnt? Do you think about how you have learnt? Do you reflect on your learning? If you begin to probe your own learning, you will find that it will give you a better starting point for thinking about different learning styles. The work of Gardner's summarised here. He's given these, he's examined these intelligences individually just to give a structure, but he does comment that they rarely exist in isolation and that most people have a distinctive combination that reflects their relative intellectual strengths and weaknesses. So we've got the linguistic, the ability to think in words and or use words to understand and express complex meanings. We've got the logical, mathematical. These students have the ability to reason about propositions, make inferences, calculate, quantify, carry out complex mathematical operations. The spatial learner can perceive visual or spatial information and transform or modify this information to recreate visual images. Bodily kinesthetic, the ability to use one's whole body or parts of the body to solve problems or fashion products. Many of our students who particularly excel in the production aspect of our subjects are bodily kinesthetic learners. Musical, the capacity to create, communicate and understand meanings through sound. Interpersonal, the capacity to empathise with others' feelings, beliefs, needs or intentions. This is a developmental process for our students. Many of them may not be strong in this area. It's an area that we might have to spend time developing in our students. Intrapersonal, sensitivity to and understanding of self. Naturalistic, sensitivity to, and ability to interact with the environment. All important intelligences, and I encourage you to work out which intelligence you feel most natural with and to work at trying to diagnose which ones fit your students best. Now, diversity, we want to celebrate diversity. We want to encourage diversity. But it's a big task for us to cater for the diversity in our classrooms today. We have to diagnose and continually monitor our students' learning to identify the needs and the abilities. I encourage you to plan and implement not only whole group activities but small group and individual learning experiences that will allow all children to experience success and be challenged in their search for knowledge and understanding. We hopefully will develop that lifelong learning that we aim for in each of our children. Is it realistic? I don't know. How can we provide for the needs of all learners? It's a big ask, but I encourage you to aim to do so. And part of that aim of catering for this wonderful diversity of students is to take the time yourself to look at different learning theories. Look at a range of approaches and philosophies to teaching and learning so that you can cater for the diverse learning needs of your students to the best of your ability. Good luck.